In today's video, we're going to take a look at how to make these full pass-through inlay charcuterie boards.
This video was made possible by Titebond. This journey all started when I saw my friends Two Makers Crew and Handy Dandy Brandy make these awesome charcuterie boards with full pass-through inlays. So I'm going to try to make some of these myself, and hopefully you can learn how to make them too and avoid the mistakes I made along the way. And the point isn't to copy others, it's to learn a new technique and implement it in your own unique way. So let's find some scraps and prep them for the CNC.
So the other day I went ahead and already made one of these. I did a 0 tolerance fit, piece for piece, and there was no way I would have got it in there. But I used my 2010 press to force it in, and it actually set, which is pretty crazy.
So you want to play rough? Okay.
So we're gonna go ahead and just cut out the eye out of these scraps to find out an actual usable tolerance, because most people aren't gonna have a press to force it in there. We want it to be snug, but not too snug we can't get it in, but not too loose we're gonna have glue gaps. So we're gonna go ahead and hop into Vectric to figure out how to get these parameters. I'm gonna show you how to do that, but don't let that scare you, because pretty much any software that's decent should have an inlay feature. I know you can do it in Easel. I've done pocket inlays in Easel, but I run Vectric. But again, just use what you learn from this and apply it to your software.
So this is the design we're going to use because it's relatively simple to figure out our inlay parameters to get this to fit in here without using any excessive force. So we're just going to focus on the eye, and then once we figure that out, we'll move on to the rest of the skull. Okay, so we have the eye. We're going to select it. Again, your software should be similar to this. Every software that's decent should have an inlay toolpath generator. So we're going to start out with the straight, which will be the male. And then the thickness is completely up to you. I'm going to use a 1/4 inch bit. And then offset allowance, we're going to leave this 0. This is what's going to decide how well the items fit together. I already generated it, so we're just going to cancel that. And then to do the same thing on the female section, we're going to do inlay toolpath, and over here, female inlay pocket hole, all the way through, not a pocket. This would work just fine for pocket as well, but for these, we're going all the way through. And then for allowance offset, we'll just start at 1/100th of an inch and see how that goes. So that one's going to cut out the hole, and this one's going to cut the plug. So for one-off stuff like this, Titebond CA glue and just plain old masking tape is my go-to. A couple quick lines of glue and we're good to go. Now we need to get this to fit inside of this. And remember, we did 1/100th of an inch tolerance, and this actually surprisingly fit pretty well. But we're gonna do some more testing for the sake of finding the best fit. I always like to keep notes and write right on the piece so I don't forget what I already tried. Then all we need to do to adjust the fit is come over here to offset allowance on one side and adjust it from 0.01. For a tighter fit, we'll go 0.007 and see how that fits. And then remember, we want it as tight as possible, but not too tight we can't get it together. And then after doing this numerous times, I realized I kind of did it backwards. Instead of cutting a bunch of different holes, I should just cut one hole with a really tight tolerance and then make that hole gradually larger until the piece fits in there. So you're going to keep all your zeros the same, but then just run a new file with a little bit larger tolerance until you get that nice, snug, clean fit.
So I went ahead and did a bunch of tests. I probably did over a dozen cuts. I tried multiple different tolerances. I also compared climb cuts to conventional cuts, and I ended up getting better results with climb cuts. I don't really know why, but that produced the best fit for me. So if you're having issues finding your tolerances, try switching to climb versus conventional or vice versa. It might be completely different for your machine, so go ahead and go through all these tests and see what fits best for you. I'm gonna end up going with 9/1000ths of an inch, and then I also tried several different wood types. The wood types didn't seem to matter much, but I think we got it, and we're going to go ahead and try some actual charcuterie inlays.
And if you're wondering what climb and conventional cut means, it's just whether the bit cuts clockwise or counterclockwise on the toolpath. Generally, you do a conventional toolpath. I generally overthink things and do more tests than I probably need to, but right away I wouldn't really worry much about it. And now that we're pretty sure this technique's going to work out, let's actually put it to use with this skull design. I did use this Dremel to take any burrs off the bottom so there wouldn't be any obstruction when I try to force it into the hole. And it appears we have a pretty good fit, so let's use this Titebond 3 as it is food safe and water resistant as the glue to hold it all together. Then I tried to put as much on there as I could because it's such a tight fit, you don't want all of it to squeeze out, so do your best to get it inside and around the plug.
So it is the following day, and we are looking pretty good. I gave it a couple passes through the drum sander. There's some tiny like hairline cracks through gaps through here some places, but that maple looks pretty dang good in there. Okay, so I had to do even more testing. I was gonna just go ahead and cut out this ice cream cone design, I'll show you in a little bit, but when I did the male and female pieces in the software, it just didn't look right. So let me explain what's going on with the inlay toolpath. So the only difference between an inlay toolpath and a regular profile toolpath is A, you're adding the allowance so they can fit together, and B, it's accounting for the size of your bit. So if you generate this in easel, it's going to ask you what size bit you're using. So like these tight corners will account for that bit. So if it's a sharp corner, it'll automatically know it's round and how much you account for whether you're using an 1/8 inch bit or 1/4 inch bit. So when I generated these toolpaths, they just looked off. So what I went ahead and did is I generated 2 male toolpaths, and that's just cutting outside of the line versus the females cutting inside of the line. So I cut 2 male outside of the line toolpaths with the same tolerance I was using before. So let's hope these fit together and I don't have to do any more testing. So if my theory is correct, these should fit together, since the only thing that really matters here is it's cutting outside the toolpath and it has the tolerance. Oh baby, that's gonna be perfect. Oh, she's pretty snug. That's pretty good. All right, let's cut the real one.
This design will consist of hard maple and walnut. I think they contrast together very nicely. I've been spending more time with this AirWeights vacuum table over the past week, and I'm definitely getting more comfortable with it. It definitely saves time because I don't really have to think about it. All I gotta do is kind of slap it on here and hit the vacuum button.
Okay, so the best part about these, this took me like 6 minutes to cut these both out. So a few talking points before we move forward. One key important factor here, you have to pay attention to wood grain. The wood grain has to be going the same direction when you glue these together. If that wood grain is going this way and this one's going this way, you're gonna have problems. But if you glue them with the same wood grain, it should be just fine as long as you got a relatively tight joint. And don't be afraid to apply liberal amount of glue on here. Bunch of glue.
And again, don't be afraid to use a bunch of glue because these fit together so tightly, you want to ensure glue's actually getting in there and not getting pushed out when you smash them together. I would use a soft rubber mallet or some sort of wooden mallet that's not going to dent the crap out of your piece when you're beating it together. And then clamp it to make sure everything goes together as tight as possible. And now let's try something a little bit more complex. This one will consist of cherry and walnut. And for all these charcuterie boards, I used a 1/4 inch downcut from Bits and Bits. I have affiliate links to different bit companies in the description if you want to support those small businesses. And then if we're inlaying into something, like this section here and that star up top, you're going to go male to female. And then connecting 2 pieces together like this, I went male to male, all with the same tolerance. And here you got to be careful because I actually cracked it. And since I got a little bit worried, I went over to the press and pressed it together. So be extra careful or just make the tolerance a little more loose on more complex designs like this. A great old woodworker tip, take some Titebond 3, some fine dust from sanding, and rub it into the areas where you think there might be some cracks. This one looked pretty good, but one of these sections did have a small gap where a clamp slipped off. I just didn't catch it right away. And this one's pretty cool as well. This is mahogany, and then the bottom part will be maple. If I were to sell these, I would focus on simple designs like this, as they're just way easier to put together and you don't have to worry about as much. And then continuing with the food theme, this one has to be my favorite. It's maple and walnut, and we're gonna make a donut. Getting these to go together evenly is definitely the hardest part, so I tried just distributing the weight with this piece of plywood, and it worked okay. I should have used 2 clamps to make sure it went down evenly, but the rubber mallet does work pretty well. I also love these ratchet clamps for weird round stuff like this. I'll add links to this kind of stuff in the description, and I think these twisty clamps with the little swivel head work the best, as the trigger clamps kind of slipped more. And then I like to spray stuff like this down with water, as it likes to swell the wood, potentially helping close any gaps, and then when you wash it the first few times, it doesn't get that rough feeling texture. Then I went ahead and broke the edges and sanded everything to 220. And then we're going to go ahead and apply tung oil to these, but any cutting board oil, mineral oil, anything like that will do just fine. I apply all these finishes the same. I apply it on there liberally and then let it sit overnight, or at least for a few hours, then wipe off the excess, and you're pretty much good to go.
So now that all of our beautiful charcuterie boards are done, let's do a little recap. So first, you're going to take some scraps, cut out a circle with a tight tolerance, take your plug, and increase that tolerance until you get a nice snug fit. And then move on to something simple like this, where you're just doing a couple simple inlays. For complexity of files, I would say this is kind of getting about as complex as you can get. You could probably get a little more complex than this. It's just they're getting a little hard to put together at this point. So on something like this, I should have added a larger tolerance so it went together a little easier, just because it was a little tough to get together. If I were to make these and batch these out and sell them, I would focus on simple designs like this or this that just go together relatively easy. Even the donut and the ice cream cone went together pretty easy. With complex designs, again, if you're putting 2 pieces together like this or this, you're going to use male to male with that same tolerance that you figured out earlier. And then if you're going inside a piece like here and here, or all these, you're going to do the male to female with that same tolerance you've been using. Overall, I think these are super cool. They weren't overly hard to make once you figure out the tolerances and how to get them together. I would say the hardest part was getting the pieces to interlock together, but that's just something you need to figure out on your own and with different tolerances. For example, this one, it's so tapered, and when I put that clamp on there, it slipped off, and I should have just glued some scraps on here so the clamp won't slip. So I do have a little bit of a glue gap on this one, but overall, after a few tries, I think you could really hone it in. This is my first time doing anything like this, and I thought they were super fun, and I'm really happy with how they turned out. I actually ended up doing this to learn how to get these to fit together perfectly, because I want to make some large-scale furniture, and I figured this would help out to understand how we could get the joinery to match together perfectly. And that's the end of the video, guys. I hope you learned something. If you guys figure out how to do this, please send me photos on Instagram of what you come up with. I love to see that kind of stuff. If you want to support the channel, we do have a Patreon. These files will be free to paid patrons. You can also buy them on our website. We have different affiliate links in the description if you want to support us that way. But either way, if you just like and comment on the video, we appreciate that just as much.